What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Friday, January 10th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 7-game NBA slate tonight. Pretty interesting slate. A lot to talk about. A lot of moving parts. Still some stuff up in the air as far as injuries, starting lineups go. Appreciate you guys checking it out. Got started later than usual today. Was just behind getting my projections done. Wasn't going to do the show, but then felt like there was a lot to actually talk about. So I am going to go through it quicker than usual. There's no way I'm doing this show for an hour because I need to make lineups. So one thing I will say, if you can just see it on the screen, I threw together the lineups that I'd be playing very quickly here, and I haven't had a chance to go through and actually look at stuff. Ownership is still kind of up in the air since we have a lot of moving parts. So definitely going to focus a lot more on just breaking down each game quickly in this video as opposed to what I think I'll be playing, because I am pretty sure, for example, I'm not actually going to have Cole Anthony as my highest owned player. I would think that's a spot where I had him in for 30 minutes. I'll probably end up going to like 28 if he starts. I'll talk about that, more with the Orlando game, but I don't want to focus too much on player exposures because they're going to change for sure. But just going to go game by game as usual, and starting with Milwaukee at Orlando. 7-point spread, give or take, in this one. No real ownership coming into the Milwaukee side. Giannis is getting about 9%. I think that he's fine. How you want to approach him is going, I think, to have a lot to do with how you feel about Jokic. Jokic is questionable tonight. My assumption for now, at least, is that he is going to play, but obviously we'll have to wait and see. Giannis has the better positional eligibility since he is power forward eligible, but I have a pretty big gap in projection between him and Jokic. And we have so much value on this slate that it's not going to matter that much, I don't think, as far as getting to an 11-8 Giannis, or I think it's a 12-3 Jokic. So how much Giannis you want really is going to depend on the ownership of the rest of your lineup and how you feel about him versus Jokic. But obviously, high upside play, second highest projected guy on the slate. Not a great matchup against Orlando. That goes without saying. Good defensive team. All of that is working against him as well. But wherever you can get to Giannis, you can feel relatively good about it. It's just that I do like a lot of mid-range options today, and then I really do like Jokic a lot as well, assuming that he plays. The rest of Milwaukee, I think, very difficult to get to prioritize. Lillard, Portis, Lopez, all at prices where they have upside, they have ceilings, but tough matchup against Orlando, and just so many good plays on this slate that it's going to be tough to want to get to them. On the other side for Orlando, Paolo Banchero is back. So they said he's going to be limited. We haven't gotten that starting lineup yet, at least that I've seen. My assumption is that he moves into the starting lineup. I projected him for 28 minutes. He's $9,500, so that's not enough minutes to get to him, but it is enough minutes for him to be a pain in the ass for the rest of his teammates. And that does lead to the Cole Anthony conversation where, like I said, I don't think I'm actually going to be jamming him in. He is very affordable at 5,500, and the playing time's been, hit or miss as a starter, but we've seen games where he plays like 35, 36. We've seen games where he plays 28. The concern that I have is that with Paolo back, there is less of a need for Cole Anthony, the scorer, and maybe Orlando leans more towards going with better defenders, guys that aren't liabilities in the same way that Anthony is, and that could cut into his playing time. I've seen him projected for like 25, 26 minutes other places. I think that is reasonable. If he starts, I will most likely end up between like somewhere in the 26, 27, 28 range. So I do think he does still have upside here at low ownership and only 5,500. Like in this price range, I think you're just going to see a lot of ownership coming into some other players. And as a result, Anthony's just going to not get ownership, and there is volatility here. So I think he's a high upside, very interesting contrarian play in tournaments if this ownership holds down around 5%. That being said, I, again, don't think that I would just be jamming him in like this. Beyond that, no real ownership coming in here either. Goga is 6,800, getting 1.5% ownership. We've continued to see Wendell Carter coming off the bench behind him, which really is an issue for both of these guys because they've only been combining for 48 minutes. Carter hasn't been playing alongside him. Now, maybe that changes here, but I doubt it with Banchero being back. Like, this is a matchup where it would make a ton of sense to have Carter alongside Goga, but assuming Banchero's in the starting lineup, I don't anticipate them starting Banchero, Carter, and Goga. So that makes it tough. Maybe they really are going to limit Paolo and they start Carter ahead of him, in which case, obviously, Goga would look better, Carter would look better. But assuming you get the starting lineup where Carter is still just coming off the bench behind Goga, it makes it tough to get to anything else from this team. Jonathan Isaac, I will mention him just because we talked about him a lot yesterday. He went back to playing 15 minutes. I don't know what the 25-minute game against the Knicks was, but it clearly didn't signal anything moving forward, at least based on what we saw yesterday. So this would be a tough slate to get to him anyway, but did just kind of want to point that out. Golden State taking on Indiana. This is going to be a mess, and you're going to get a ton of ownership coming in here, as you should. The Warriors have 10 active players. One of those players is Quentin Post, who has played a total of, 10 minutes this season. I did project him for 6 minutes just because it is Steve Kerr. I don't really want to be in the position where I'm projecting a ton of minutes to every, to 8 players, knowing that he has 2 other guys that he can use to screw things up. So I went 6 minutes to Post, just enough to kind of get me in a more comfortable range with the other players that I'm projecting minutes to. I'm not positive that he'll play him alongside Jackson Davis or Looney, but he does have the ability to shoot based on his college numbers, which shout out to Josh for pointing that one out to me. Again, I don't know if that means Kerr will do it, but Kerr does, as we know, like to play a lot of guys. Steven said Trace Jackson Davis still a Q. No, he's available. He's in the starting lineup. They're starting Schroeder, Waters, Hield, Anderson, and Jackson Davis. So my assumption from a rotational standpoint is that you're getting 48 minutes from Jackson Davis and Kevon Looney. So I projected 27.5 to Jackson Davis. I projected 20.5 to Looney. Like I said, I gave 6 minutes to Post. I assume if he plays, it's alongside those guys, just to get him a stretch, one rotation probably. Don't know again, if he plays, but that's how I projected that. And then I projected Schroeder and Spencer to essentially split 48 minutes. I think I might have gone to 50. I went 33 Schroeder. I went either 15 or 17 on Spencer. Yeah, 15 on Spencer. So I just have them splitting 48. And then for the other 3 positions, you kind of just have probably a hot hand approach. I think the best that you can kind of do thinking through it and trying to read Steve Kerr's mind is with Steph out, they do obviously need shooting. Buddy Hield gives them that. Lindy Waters gives them that more than really anybody else that they have available. So I still think that you're basically just going to see, 22 to 30 minutes from all probably of Santos, Anderson, Moody, Waters. Yeah, I think that group, I projected 32 to Hield. I would assume he plays a little bit more than that group, but if he's cold, maybe not. So I think there's going to be a big hot hand approach here, but this team is so short-handed and cheap and in a good spot that there's going to be a ton of ownership here, and I don't really have a good way around it. I'm getting to 37% Hield, but again, my exposures here aren't super important. 66% projected ownership to Hield, 53 to Anderson, 47 to Schroeder, 30 to Waters, 28 to Santos, only 15 to Jackson Davis at 5,500. That's interesting to me, but again, for whatever it's worth, that's kind of just where I got to anyway. It probably has to do with just the ability to pay up for whatever centers you want. And so getting to Jokic, getting to Vooch against Washington, maybe, stuff like that. Towns is on the slate. So that's probably why the ownership's a little bit lower on Jackson Davis. 12% coming into $3,200 Looney, which I think looks fine. 12% coming into Moody at 3,600. I don't think there's anything wrong with playing any of these guys. Again, I would guess that the least minutes volatility is in Dennis Schroeder, Trace Jackson Davis, and Buddy Hield, but it is also a back-to-back with Steve Kerr. If Hield misses his first 5 threes, who knows what happens to his minutes. Jackson Davis, I assume, seems to be pretty solidified as far as his playing time goes right now, but still, it is Steve Kerr. But I would assume those are kind of the safest guys. A few questions in chat about how many Warriors in a lineup. It's still a 7-game slate, so I don't. Whoops, wrong screen. Mostly it looks like 3 for me. This is out of 150 lineups. I would have 4 out of 150 that had 4 Golden State guys, 26 that have 3, 57 that have 2. And the reasoning there is that none of these Golden State guys project as the highest scorers on the slate. A lot of them project as the best or some of the top point per dollar values. But at some point, you need to go out there and get raw points too. And so that's what's going to limit them. If this were a team that happened to like also have Jokic, for example, then you would see more lineups that have like 4 or 5 of them. Like, let's say Jackson Davis were just Jokic or projected like Jokic. Then you could just say, well, I'm going to play Waters, I'm going to play Schroeder, I'm going to play Hield, and then I'm going to take the highest projected guy on the slate in this hypothetical in Jackson Davis. But since you don't have any of those guys, you're basically just grabbing point per dollar value here. It's very unlikely any of these guys go for like 45, 50 plus raw points. You're still going to want to then be getting to other parts of the slate, even though there's so many good point per dollar values here, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what's driving that. Like, there was a Memphis slate the other day where they had 8 or 9 guys that I was fine getting more of them, but that's because you had on that particular slate, like Jaren Jackson as one of the highest projected guys, Desmond Bane is one of the highest projected guys, in addition to all the value they had. You don't have that, super highly projected raw point part from Golden State today. On the other side for Indiana, Miles Turner is available. He is back. Tyrese Halliburton is in. Indiana's rotations have pretty much sucked lately. Tyrese Halliburton's minutes have been down a little bit. Projected him for 34. Miles Turner should play around 31 or so. Pascal Siakam continues to not play a ton of minutes. I went 32. I would have trouble projecting anything higher than that. So overall, this is just a secondary team, I think, where any of the starters are fine. Pascal Siakam at 7,200 getting 10% ownership. Halliburton at 8,600 getting 5. Nembhard at 4,800 getting 4. Same for Turner at 6,400. If you want to use any of these pieces as just like a one-off, or I mean, I guess technically part of a game stack with Golden State in a lineup, that's fine. Any of them are capable of going and having big games, especially up against Golden State's, basically D squad here. Draymond not being out there is going to most likely make the defense worse. So it is a good spot for Indiana. It's just that none of them stand out individually as top plays on this slate because there are so many injuries on this slate that basically if you're not the highest projected guy or a top point per dollar value, you're a secondary play. That's kind of all that there is to it. So you have a bunch of those for Indiana. Now, moving on to one of the more interesting parts of this slate, absolute mess here with the Pelicans. No Herb Jones. He's probably out for the year. Trey Murphy is still out. Zion is out because he got suspended about an hour ago. So we don't have a starting lineup here yet. I am very interested to see what it looks like. I'm going to just kind of lay out the 2 different things I think the Pelicans could do. I'll tell you the way that I think it's likely to go, but the starting lineup is going to tell us a lot. So I assume that Misi is going to just stay in the starting lineup along with DeJounte Murray, who is available, and CJ McCollum. The question marks are who fills in for Herb Jones / Trey Murphy / Zion. We got Jeremiah Robinson Earl starting in place of Zion last game with Herb Jones starting. Robinson Earl got a spot start. It was really bad for me because I played a lot of him. He played 15 minutes outside of a few minutes of garbage time. So even if he starts here, there is no guarantee about his playing time. But my guess for the starting lineup is that they go Murray, McCollum, Javonte Green, Robinson Earl, Misi. They could do any number of things, but that's my guess. If that is the starting lineup, I am actually going to be pretty aggressive in projecting minutes for Javonte Green, Robinson Earl, and Brandon Boston. The reason for that, and keep in mind with all of this, the Pels are really bad this year. They are missing, obviously, a ton of their best players, and there is no guarantee that they stick to previous rotational patterns that they've used when they were better and healthier and all of that. They can do whatever the hell they want here. This is a team that was just losing by 30 at halftime to the Blazers. Like, they can just try anything. So keep all of that in mind. But CJ McCollum they have basically not, over the last 2 years, played 3 of Murray, McCollum, Hawkins, Alvarado at the same time pretty much ever. It's happened a little bit. Like, they did it for a couple of minutes last game, for example, and I think they probably do it for a few minutes today. But if they start Green, Robinson Earl, or they start Green Boston, or Boston Robinson Earl, or whatever, if the starting lineup does not contain Jose Alvarado or Jordan Hawkins, I'm going to lean more towards them still kind of containing most of the minutes for that group of four to two positions. And maybe they play a few minutes alongside each other. But if they do that, that actually opens up a lot of minutes for the group of Robinson Earl, Javonte Green, Brandon Boston. It would probably mean that Reeves is in the rotation for like 10 minutes or so. And that's how I'm going to project it if they start those guys. If they were to start like Murray plus Hawkins plus McCollum, then go crazy. Play a lot of $3,200 Hawkins. Play probably more Alvarado, because it would signal that they're cool with just running those three guys out there, three of those guys out there together. But I think it's a really interesting spot because Hawkins is 3,200. He's a good point per minute guy if he gets the minutes. But if they start Robinson Earl again, to me, that would signal that they're going to at least try and go that other route that's more in line with what they've done in the past. So again, this is all really, really volatile, but you're trying to make the best guess that you can going into it. And I'm going to basically be doing that based on the starting lineup. If they signal they'll play three guards together, I am loading up on cheap guards. If they only start the two guards, I'm going to project the cheap wings heavier for more minutes than the guards. And that's basically how I'm approaching it. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but looking forward to, I guess, getting burned by Robinson Earl again, it seems like. So the starting lineup is going to basically inform how I'm guessing about all of this. Also, one other small note, if they do start the three guards, I would also increase the minutes projection slightly for Murray and McCollum in addition to Alvarado and Hawkins, because then I think that you just see them play more. Like when you're missing Zion, you're missing Murphy, you're missing Ingram, you're missing Jones, it makes a lot of sense to play more minutes, to use your best players for more minutes. But if they're going to kind of self-contain to 96 minutes with those four guards, if all playing more Murray and more McCollum is doing is getting you less Alvarado and less Hawkins, it's kind of marginally not as big a deal as if you can do that and replace like Robinson Earl minutes or Javonte Green minutes or Reeves minutes. So I would project them a little bit heavier too if they go with that small starting lineup. So really, really interesting spot for the Pels. I will also note that this game only has like a 7-point spread. Obviously, this team can get destroyed. They just did by the Blazers at home. But this game doesn't have as big a spread as you would expect it to, I guess. Obviously, Philadelphia shorthanded as well. Now moving over to the Philadelphia side, no Joel Embiid again. Paul George is back. No Andre Drummond. So my assumption for the starting lineup is Maxey, Oubre, George, Martin, Yabusele. Yabusele playing around 34 minutes. Bona backing him up. Maxey probably playing around 38. That's what he's averaged without Embiid this year. Paul George, Oubre, Martin probably all playing 36, give or take. So Paul George is getting a ton of ownership here. 54%, $7,500. It makes sense. Forward positions in general, not as much opportunity cost as other positions. He is much better without Joel Embiid on the floor. All of that looks really good. I do think this is an instance where clearly he's still a good play. And like I said, don't read too much into my exposures here. But kind of like I was talking about, and you can actually see it here with Maxey too. Same thing I was talking about with Maxey last time Philadelphia played. Paul George looks really, really good, but you're going to want to be trying to save ownership somewhere in your lineup if you're playing large field tournaments. And it's really tough to do on a slate like this without giving up a lot of projection, because it's not like you can just say, well, I'm not going to play the 3K guys from Golden State or from the Pels. I'm going to play 3K guys from Boston, because like they don't exist. Those pivots don't exist outside of those couple of teams. So you kind of end up having to eat some version of ownership for the really cheap guys. And then because you have these really cheap guys, you're going to plug in Jokic, or you're going to plug in SGA, or you're going to plug in Tatum, or you're going to plug in Giannis. Because if you don't, you're just giving up a lot of raw points at the top end. You're saying like, oh, well, I'm going to let you have Jokic and I'm going to play Vucevic. Like, why would you do that? So what ends up kind of happening is the most logical spot to pivot is the place with the most pivots that are somewhat close. And that's the mid-range where, yeah, Paul George projects really well, but maybe you can somehow turn that into like Vooch, or turn that into Jaylen Brown, or turn that into one of the Knicks wings, or whatever at lower ownership, just as, examples off the top of my head. Same thing with Tyrese Maxey. Clearly a good play at 9,400, but I think you're just going to find more viable pivots from the ownership in that range than the guys at the very top or at the very bottom of the salary spectrum. So that's why you're seeing that here on George and Maxey. Yabusele still looks like a good value at 5,500, power forward eligible. Oubre still a good value at 5,700. Martin, not a terrible value at 5,200 either, but I'm getting to him less than Yabusele or Oubre as I would expect. Nothing else to really talk about outside of the starters from Philadelphia. They've been running a really, really ugly bench rotation where everybody gets like 10 minutes and it gives you basically nothing for DFS. Oklahoma City taking on the Knicks with kind of 9 guys again. They did bring back Carlson on a 10-day. None of the guys that I would expect to be in the rotation in this game that were out last game are active here. AJ Mitchell's still out. I think it actually just came through for like 10 to 12 weeks or something. So I am once again expecting really big minutes for the main pieces here. This game has a 4-point spread. You're in MSG. It's another marquee game against one of the best teams in the East. So everything kind of points to OKC just running big minutes again. We got 38 from SGA last game, despite being in foul trouble early in the third quarter. He looks really good to me. Getting 25% ownership, that seems a little bit low, given that a $10,400 price tag on this slate is not really that different from like Maxey's $9,400 price tag, for example, because there's so much value. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to be tough to get to him. I like SGA a lot. I think using Lou Dort makes some sense at 4K. He's likely to give you mid-30s in minutes. Jalen Williams coming off the big game, probably giving you another 36 minutes or so at 8,300. High upside play there. If you can get to some Hartenstein or $3,600 case and Wallace as a pivot from some higher owned guys, that's perfectly fine. But to me, SGA is the priority here from the OKC side, and then you just have secondary plays with everybody else. On the New York side, Cat and McBride are questionable still. I projected them both in for now. Same as we've talked about a lot recently. If Cat is out, obviously it opens up usage and everything for the starters. You probably get Jericho Sims starting. Not a good point per minute guy. Probably not super necessary on this slate. If McBride is out, it just gives some more playing time to Payne, to Shamet, a couple more minutes. You could project a little bit more to the main pieces for the Knicks as well. With them projected in, Karl Anthony Towns getting 19% ownership here. I didn't get to a ton in the initial run, but I think he obviously looks good. Probably has to do with just how much Jokic I was getting to, for example, but he obviously looks good. The rest of these guys are tough to prioritize, kind of like I was saying with Indiana. It's just, if you are playing a bunch of lineups and you land on some Josh Hart or Bridges or Anunoby or Brunson, all of that is fine, but it's a brutal matchup here against OKC. Very, very good team defensively. We did just see them give up a ton of points to Cleveland in their last game. It can happen, but it's a very tough matchup on paper on a slate where you have no shortage of alternatives elsewhere. Sacramento taking on Boston, no De'Aaron Fox again, so we should get a starting lineup of Monk, Ellis, DeRozan, Keegan Murray, and Sabonis. This game does have plenty of blowout risk, about a 10.5 point spread in Boston, but the Kings do have a really condensed lineup if they are able to hang in this game. Like if this game actually goes all the way down to the wire, you're probably getting 38 plus minutes from Sabonis, 36, 37 from DeRozan, 35, 36 from Monk. Ellis probably plays, mid 30s. I didn't project it that, I took a couple minutes off, but still went 37 minutes to Sabonis, 35 to Monk, 32 to Ellis, 35 DeRozan, 33 Keegan. I got to a lot of Monk. I got to a lot of Sabonis. I think they both look fine, just given that, 7K on this slate for Malik Monk is not the same as 7K on slates with tighter pricing. So you're just kind of trying to mix in guys that have high upside at relatively low ownership, and Monk certainly does with Fox out. Same goes for Sabonis. Only 9,400, so he's like $1,000 less than Cat, getting similar ownership. I got to a little bit more Sabonis than I did Cat. Ellis at 4K is somebody that isn't going to project as well from a point per dollar standpoint as like the Golden State guys or the New Orleans guys, but he is going to have less ownership and he is still going to play a lot of minutes. So kind of like Case and Wallace, I think it's a viable pivot, not a priority, but in individual lineups, somebody you can look to. Steven said any Devin Carter interest. I only gave him like 10 minutes or so. He played a lot the other day because of garbage time. All right, I give him 15 minutes. Still not showing up for me. You still have, Trey Lyles probably playing low to mid 20s. You have Herter in the rotation. Carter probably needs massive foul trouble and or blowout. to get enough minutes for me to want him. And with like 100 sub 4K guys that I can play on this slate, just not going to end up going that route. Sabonis and Monk look like the priorities for me from Sacramento. On the Boston side, not a lot of ownership coming in here since they are fully healthy. Derek White is back, so you should get the normal starting lineup with Drew, White, Brown, Tatum, and Porzingis. Horford off the bench, Pritchard off the bench. Nothing standing out, but Jason Tatum at 10-3, does give you a high ceiling. He is somebody where, if you have a lineup where maybe you can somehow get from like Paul George at 7,500 to Tatum at 10-3 and drop somewhere else, maybe consider doing that just to save ownership. Obviously, Tatum is capable of being one of the highest scorers on the slate, but I'm not getting to a ton of him. Porzingis, Jaylen Brown, same kind of thing. Kind of just looking to those guys as, they have high ceilings, but none of them look like priorities. Drew Holiday at 5,400 would be pretty interesting on a lot of slates. On this one, it just becomes really tough. You can make the case that like he's not a 30 or 40 to 1 underdog to Dennis Schroeder at the same price, but the gap is still pretty big in projection, given that he's playing with Tatum, Porzingis, Brown, and White, and Schroeder is playing with the Warriors G League team. So it's not a spot that I would expect to get too much, if at all. Washington taking on the Bulls in what does look like a pretty appealing game between two teams that do not play defense. You do have a double-digit spread here. You do have injury news that we are waiting on for Washington. This is one of the spots that we still just don't have answers. Jordan Poole is questionable. Alex Sarr is questionable. We know that Brogdon is out. Johnny Davis and Rashawn Holmes are also questionable. They don't matter if Sarr and Poole are in. If Sarr is out and Holmes is out, then you're probably getting like a Joval start with Gill as the backup center. Whereas if Sarr is out and Holmes is in, you're probably getting Joval start with Holmes as the backup center. So it kind of matters there. But I projected the questionable guys in for now, which makes Washington not look that great despite the good matchup, because you're just in a situation where this team has a lot of kind of interchangeable bodies that are going to cut into each other's playing time. I didn't project anybody for more than 32 minutes here. I went 32 minutes to Koulibaly. I went 31 to Poole, 29 to Kuzma. Kuzma at 6,400 certainly has upside here. He'll look better if Poole is out because you get a bump in usage. But if all these guys are in, you're kind of just hoping for the good. Jordan Poole shooting night at 8,200 or Kuzma shooting night at 6,400. None of them are going to look great. If Sarr is out, Joval at 5,800 certainly starts to look good. He'd end up probably being pretty similar to how like Trace Jackson Davis looked. If Poole is out, you get probably George back in the starting lineup. It increases minutes for George. It increases minutes for Carrington. It gets Jared Butler in the rotation. Now, keep in mind, Jared Butler is not a 2.5 fantasy point per minute guy like he showed last time out. And the rotations that Washington's been running, he's not sharing the floor very much with Carrington. So basically, Butler's likely to play if Poole is out. Butler is likely to play basically 48 minus Carrington's minutes plus like 3, give or take. He's generally playing combined. Carrington and Butler is generally 50 to 51 minutes. So maybe the game blows out and Butler gets like 23 because Carrington only gets 28. But if it ends up being relatively, competitive, you're probably getting something, if Poole is out, like 32 minutes for Carrington, like 19 minutes, give or take, for Butler. He is priced up to 3,900. So he does still have, some volatility there if Poole is out, as far as like just a low-owned value guy that can obviously put up a big score. But I think your takeaway from the last few games with Poole out shouldn't be like, oh, Butler has a path to 30 minutes and, 40 fantasy points again is likely. He's probably playing 19, 20 minutes, 18 to 20 minutes if Poole is out. If Poole is in, I gave Butler like 8 minutes just because he's been playing so well. I think Washington might reward him, but not enough to matter for anybody wondering about that. On the other side for the Bulls, we have a clean injury report as far as Q tags go. Still no Torrey Craig, no Iota Sunmu as far as rotation or fringe rotation pieces. Really, really good spot here. I, at least right now, would be getting to a lot of the Bulls, especially because they don't have a ton of ownership. This team has like a 126 to 127 team total. Zach LaVine's minutes with the Sunmu out have been trending up as well. He played nearly 40 minutes in the Bulls' last competitive game. He played like 35 and a half, 36 minutes last time out in a game that was not competitive to the very end against Indiana. They lost by 16. Levine subbed out with 5 minutes to go after playing 35 minutes. I projected him for 35 and a half minutes today, and still, right now at least, would be getting a lot of him. I don't think he should be, 2/5 the ownership of Paul George at basically the same price. He's like $600 more, but on this slate, that's basically meaningless as far as what else you can do in your lineup. I understand why there's more ownership going to George. I think this gap is too big. And if it holds, I do like getting to a lot of Zach LaVine as a natural pivot in that price range. Has shooting guard eligibility as well. Kobe White, 6,600, high upside, contrarian play. Josh Giddey, same thing at 7K. Vooch not getting any ownership at 8,500. Great spot for him going up against Washington here. I really like getting to these main pieces from the Bulls. Also, Patrick Williams, 34 and 35 minutes 2 and 3 games ago. And then last game plays 21 minutes. Just had some shortened rotations. The game was a blowout, but he clearly has a path to playing 30 plus in a good spot here at no ownership. So the Bulls, I would say, are my favorite like contrarian team, tournament team, for lack of a better phrase. Like obviously Golden State, the Pels, the Sixers to some extent are my favorite teams to play. But when you're talking about relatively low ownership, Chicago's the team that is popping up for me as far as just like getting to a lot of these guys to still get really high ceilings without taking on a ton of ownership. Lonzo Ball showing up for me at 3,900. We've seen his playing time up as well. He didn't get his closing minutes last game because of the blowout. Still played 19, probably would have played like 23, 24, 25, 22, 26 in his previous 4. I projected him for 23 here. I like this team. Like you can go to Jalen Smith at 3,200 in the largest field tournaments too if you wanted to. So I like getting to the Bulls quite a bit in tournaments. And then wrapping things up with Brooklyn and Denver. Day'Ron Sharpe is off the injury report. Other than that, same injury situation as we had last game, where they are still missing Cam Johnson. They are still missing, they have Ben Simmons back today as well. So Ben Simmons back, Day'Ron Sharpe back. They are still missing Cam Johnson. They're missing Russell. They're missing Cam Thomas. Missing, all the guys that have been out for a while in addition to them. Simmons being back and Sharpe being back, though, does obviously just give you more bodies that are going to play and makes this team look pretty unappealing. Noah Clowney, 5K. Day'Ron Sharpe, 4,400. Zaire Williams, 5,100. Jalen Wilson, 4,500. All getting like 1 to 5% ownership. If they land in a lineup here or there, if you're playing a bunch of them, fine. But one of the lowest team totals on the board, and just not a team that I'd expect to be getting very much of. And then finally for Denver, Jokic projected for 41% ownership. Clearly, to me, the top pay-up option on the slate. I have him projected, I think, like 10-plus points higher than anybody else, assuming he plays. He missed time, missed the back-to-back with an illness. I don't expect him to be limited if he's back. There is obviously blowout risk here. But the nice thing about Denver is that their second unit is absolute dog shit. It's very hard for them to actually blow teams out by enough that like you lose a ton of minutes for somebody like Jokic, unless Jokic is just blowing them out on his own. Now, granted, this Brooklyn team is bad enough that it could certainly happen, but there is just generally a little bit less blowout risk, even in these games with double-digit spreads for a team like Denver than for teams like Cleveland, where Cleveland is just good, period, no matter who's on the floor. Denver's really, really bad when Jokic is not on the floor, and there's a tendency for it to just be like, oh shit, Denver's up 20 in the first quarter, and then they're up by 6 at halftime, and everybody plays pretty close to full minutes. And even if Jokic doesn't play full minutes, you have such a big gap in projection here. Like if Jokic goes, plays 30 minutes and scores 58 DraftKings points, that would still be the highest projection on the slate, ahead of Giannis. So Jokic just obviously looks really, really good. Beyond that, assuming Jokic is in, everybody else looks like just secondary options. They all take a hit with him back. Porter, Westbrook, Murray, all still reasonably enough priced to be contrarian plays on this slate, but nothing outside of Jokic that stands out. If Jokic were to miss, then obviously you get more value with DeAndre Jordan. You get a bump in usage and productivity for Murray, for Westbrook. Michael Porter Jr., in theory, gets more opportunities, but he's actually been a worse point per minute guy over the last 2 years and this year without Jokic on the floor than alongside him, which does make sense given that Michael Porter Jr. is looking to knock down 3-pointers and Jokic is the guy that is the best at getting him open threes. So it does make sense why Michael Porter Jr.'s average production drops without Jokic, but his ceiling, you could argue, is still higher just because there's more usage available if he happens to get hot. But Porter is one of those guys that isn't really creating his own shot. So he does kind of take a step back on average when he doesn't have Jokic creating for him. Jorge said you think Joker is playing. I do. They are double-digit favorites here. Their line in the 2 games he missed was pretty much a few points off from where you would expect it to be if he were in. The Nuggets probably aren't a double-digit favorite against like a mediocre high school team without Joker. So as bad as the Nets are, I think you would see a tighter spread if it was likely he was going to be out. Obviously that's kind of just reading into things, but I do think he's going to be back here. I projected him in. I projected him out the last couple of slates. So hopefully he's in, given that I'm getting to a lot of him, and obviously it changes the slate a lot if he's out. But my guess is he's playing. I agree with TDID in chat. So that's all I have for you on this one. I need to get out of here and get to making lineups, but wanted to jump on and just talk through the slate as quickly as I could. Thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Have a good weekend. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here next week.